Hello gamers, I'm your host Matty Jay, and today I will be bringing you another entry in the Retro Review series, where I provide a detailed account of the forgotten games of the past. This segment is part of DanielPrime.com, a video games blog with editorial based content for both modern and retro gaming. Basically, my mate Daniel writes for the blog and I help him out with the voice work. So if you enjoyed this review, then we recommend that you check out the blog at DanielPrime.com. But for now, on with the review. This time our game in question is Totally Rad for the NES. Totally Rad is your typical 8-bit platformer released by Jaleco back in 1991. The game borrows many elements from other run and gun platformers like Mega Man, but puts its own spin on the winning formula. This is the kick for Totally Rad and is tied in nicely with the storyline. The game's thin storyline revolves around a guy named Jake and his adventure to save his girlfriend Allison, and later on her father, from the Californian underground people. In order to save his girlfriend, he needs to take advantage of his magic abilities taught to him by his magician friend Zebediah. Now, as you probably realised, this game doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and there's a good reason for it. Totally Rad is actually an Americanized version of a Japanese game called Magic John. When fixing this game for the American audience, Jaleco modified the character sprites, slotted in a different story with the template of Magic John, and rewrote the script. So the game's story doesn't really work in the template of a different game. Also, to appeal to the American audiences, the game's dialogue is overrun with ludicrous teenage slang, which further lessens any interest that you might have possibly had in the story. Words like gnarly, tubular, mondo just aren't cool words anymore. The worst case of this is in the instruction manual, where it takes them 4 pages to explain the paper-thin story, stretched out by nonsensical, ridiculous slang phrases. The only amusement that you'll likely get from the story comes in the form of laughing at some of the awful translation and awkward teenage slang. Thankfully, the story takes a back seat for the most part and only creeps in when it's feeling uninvited. The magic that you have learned from Zebediah is used throughout the game and is the game's main selling point. Your magic can be used to fire beams at your enemies as well as cast magic spells. As you're playing, you can press start to bring up a menu of magic spells. This also doubles as your pause screen. These spells fall into 2 categories. You've got your basic spells like healing, invincibility, and damage all enemies with elemental based attack, etc. And then you have your transformation spells where you can transform into several creatures. These creatures include an eagle, fish, and a lion. The spells do a good job at mixing up levels, as utilising the right spell at the right time can change the difficulty of the whole level. For example, when I was younger, I used to use the eagle spell to fly through the first level, Kirby style. Balancing your magic and HP is the key to beating Totally Rad. You need to keep your HP up, have enough MP to heal yourself when facing against the menacing bosses, and figure out when the best time to turn into one of the creatures is. This all adds a surprising amount of depth. The difficulty is set just right as well. It's set so that unless you are a platforming god, you'll need to utilise the spell system, which ensures that this mechanic is never exploited or underused. The actual run and gun action is typically what you'd expect from games of this era. There's a decent variety in enemies which keeps you on your toes, and each level looks uniquely different. The core platforming and shooting elements fulfills its purpose, but does nothing more than that. It doesn't try to be overly creative or unique. It sticks to the gameplay which works, but unfortunately this is the problem. The gameplay feels constant throughout. Jump around, see an enemy, align yourself correctly, shoot them, and move on. There is nothing fresh to mix up the gameplay and maintain your interest. And when there are other platformers on the console which pinnacleize these elements so well, it makes average performers like Totally Rad feel like a real grind. This grind is worsened by some fairly frustrating cracks in the platforming system, as well as enemies that just don't seem to die. The last point becomes overwhelmingly apparent in the last few levels, where some enemies must be able to take more than 100 hits without dying. This doesn't make the game challenging, it makes the game feel monotonous, because once you know the movement patterns of a boss, you just follow those same patterns 100 times over until you finally defeat them. The consistent samey gameplay makes the game feel stale, and other cracks bring forward great frustration. It's definitely not a good mix. Despite these things, Totally Rad plays fine and is enjoyable for the most part, but once you realise that you are doing the same thing over and over again, it quickly starts to grow tiresome. It's not as though Totally Rad is awful, but its generic nature doesn't encourage you to continue playing. What will encourage you to continue though are the quite sublime graphics. Totally Rad shows off all the accolades of a late NES title. A great spread of colours, some neat parallax scrolling, lots of moving animations in the background, and some detailed art. Especially impressive are boss fights where the boss fills the screen with large detailed sprites. Furthermore, the game lacks slowdown and those white sprite flashes that some games are notorious for. The game runs pretty smoothly overall, and it's a neat little package. The sound doesn't do a bad job either. It expresses the mood quite well, and some tracks are actually pretty rad. Overall, Totally Rad probably doesn't live up to its admittedly awesome name, but it's still a great platformer with some interesting gameplay elements and some sweet NES 1990s graphics that nudge it above the rest of the platforming crowd. If you've finished all of the other great NES platformers like Mario and Mega Man and still want some more action, then pick this one up. Keep in mind though that if you've had plenty of platforming experience, it'll probably take you around an hour and a half to clock this one up on your first go. Okay guys, if you have any comments, queries or concerns, then feel free to drop us a line at daniel@danielprime.com. For more great retro and modern gaming content, check us out at danielprime.com. I'm your host, Matty Jay. Thanks for watching.